Before we jump into anything else in the video, I have to fix a typo really quick. You'll notice it says day 1 right here. It also says it down here. This is going to be day 2. So this is going to be one video to cover 2 days worth of material. But really it's all the same concept. It's really, we're just practicing to get really good at solving these equations and justifying the steps. So in that interest, that this is really just all about practicing, I want to go ahead and work our way through the starter today. Friendly reminder about the steps. Our goal is to get the variable by itself. So in this particular case of number 1, our variable is n. We want to get it all by itself. So what is keeping the n from being by itself? Well, we have the negative 41, we have the 8. Now, it doesn't matter which order you resolve these in. However, I think it's easier to start with the thing furthest away from the variable, which in this case is going to be that negative 41. So how do we get rid of it? Well, we have to kind of undo it. So what is the opposite of subtraction, which is what's currently happening? Addition. So we have to add 41 to both sides. So let's go ahead and do so. I'm going to erase these little marks that I made earlier. I'm going to just add 41 to both sides. Why can we do that? It's the addition property of equality. From here, we get 8n is equal to 88. Now what's keeping the n from being by itself? This 8. So how do we undo the 8? Well, what's the relationship between n and 8? Multiplication. So how do we undo multiplication? Division. So we divide this side by 8, divide this side by 8. That'll give us our answer, n is equal to 11. Let's just go ahead and finish writing out the property, the division property of equality. Let's go ahead and do number 2. 170 is equal to 13x plus 1. Now you'll notice our variable is on the right side, and I don't like that. I find that harder to do. Is it fine if it makes sense to you to do it over there? Great, do it. But for me personally, I'm going to go ahead and use the symmetric property first, giving us 13x plus 1 is equal to 170. If you chose to do this at the end, that would also be fine. Different ways to get to the same result. Now let's ask ourselves the question, what is keeping our x from being by itself? I see a 13 and I see a 1. Let's go ahead and get rid of the 1 first because it's a little bit further away, although you can do this in any order. If you tried to get rid of the 13 first, you'd probably end up with fractions though, and I'm willing to bet most students don't want to do that. So let's go ahead and get rid of the 1. So we're going to subtract 1. And that'll give us 13x is equal to 169. Why can we subtract 1 from both sides? Well, that's going to be the subtraction property of equality. Now we're left with 13x is equal to 169. Once again, our goal is to get that x all by itself. So what's keeping it from being by itself? That 13. So let's go ahead and divide by 13. And that will give us x is equal to 13 because 13 times 13 is equal to 169. Why can we divide by 13? Well, that's the division property of equality. All right. Today really is a bit of a practice day. So we're just going to go ahead and keep practicing our skills. We're going to practice the distribution. Now keep in mind, distribution is when you take something on the outside and you make sure that everything on the inside gets it. It's only fair. So in this case, we have a 3 on the outside and negative x minus 5 on the inside. So we have to multiply the 3 to the negative x. You must also multiply it to the negative 5. That will be negative x times 3. That would be negative 3x. 3 times negative 5, that will be negative 15. So our answer is going to be negative 3x minus 5. An important thing to keep in mind when you are doing distribution is to make sure that if there's a negative sign, it goes with it. So that's going to be like this. So it's going to be negative 4 times 2. That's going to be negative 8. Negative 4 times negative y. Ooh, what is a negative times a negative? That's going to become a positive. So that's going to be plus 4y. Negative times a negative becomes a positive. All right, our last one, there's no negative sign, so it's fairly straightforward. But there's 3 of them. It's the exact same process. So that's going to become 21x. 21 times x is 21x. Plus 21y. Plus 21z. All right. Make sure we really understand that. You'll notice that we will have some distribution problems on your homework. Now, we did some justification earlier. We're explaining why we can do it. And I want you to do justification on at least 4 of your homework problems, but you don't have to do it for every single one because it just becomes tedious at that point. It is a little bit more writing. So, 4 problems with justification. For the other problems, you don't have to. So for these problems, I'm just going to go ahead and solve them, which is really just the part on this side. So we have 2 plus 3x is equal to negative 16. I'm going to kind of breeze my way through this. If you need more help, feel free to ask the question. All right, so we have 2 plus 3x. Our goal is to get the x all by itself. What's keeping the x from being by itself? Well, the 2 and the 3. I always think it's easier to get rid of the thing without the variable first, the furthest thing away, which in this case is the 2. So let's go ahead and subtract 2. We can do that because of the subtraction property of equality. That will become 3x is equal to negative 18. Let's go ahead and divide each side by 3. That will give us x is equal to negative 6. Now, you'll notice in number 2 here, we have variables on both sides. We have 2 x's. We're going to have to combine them. So, let's go ahead and see if we can get this x onto one side. You'll notice I gave you the hint. It's easier if you get the variable on the left. Some of you may find that easier. Some of you may find it easier to subtract from the bigger thing. I personally like to keep my variables on the left. So let's go ahead and subtract 2x from both sides. The reason I'm doing this is to get the variable all by itself. So that's going to be 2 minus x is equal to 3. From here, we want to get that x all by itself. So let's go ahead and subtract 2, because that's keeping it from being by itself. So then we end up with negative x is equal to 1. Now, are we done? No. Is the x all by itself? We have a negative sign. So from here, we have to divide by a negative 1 to get x is equal to negative 1 for our answer. Another way of thinking about this is we can't have a negative x, so we make this positive, which means we have to make the other side negative. Switch the signs. If you need more help with that, I'm happy to help you through it. Okay? Alrighty. Let's go ahead and just move on to day 2. Day 2, it's just more practice. So I'm just going to make a same video for it. We're going to go ahead and skip the starter. If you need more help solving these equations, you're welcome to reference right here or ask the question, and I'm happy to help you. We are starting to add word problems. Now, here's the thing about word problems. The second I add words into math, a lot of students panic, but there really is no reason to panic, okay? Ask yourself these questions. What is happening? Describe the scenario brought in the word problems in your own words. I can't tell you the number of times a student says, I don't understand the word problem, but then I ask them even what it's about, and they can't even tell me what's going on. So in this case, it says, Ryan's bikes rent bikes for $13 plus $4 an hour. Enid paid $25 to rent a bike. For how many hours did he rent the bike? So in this particular case, we're dealing with bikes. We're renting them for a certain amount of time. So then let's ask ourselves the question, what makes sense? Now, if we're renting a bike for a certain amount of time, because we're renting per hour, I'm expecting a positive number, because it doesn't make sense to have a negative number for the number of hours you could rent a bike. And it just doesn't make sense either for it to be like rented for like 1 million hours or something like that. So I kind of have an idea of where I'm headed. I'm headed for like maybe between like 0 to 10 hours. That's kind of what we're thinking our answer is going to be. So what is happening? We've talked about what makes sense, okay? Couple things to also keep in mind as you're working your way through this is always means equal sign. Of always means multiplication. Always, 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 always. So if you see those words in a problem, that's when you know what they mean, okay? Couple other words to keep your eye out for. Sum or plus. That's probably going to mean addition. Difference or subtract, minus. Those are probably going to mean subtraction. We've talked about of means multiplication, and then division doesn't show up particularly often. So we're going to just not think about those for a minute, okay? So Ryan's bike rents bikes for $13 plus $4 per hour. Enid paid $25 to ride a bike. For how many hours did he rent the bike? Okay. We've thought about what makes sense. So it costs $13 to even look at the bike. So we know that for sure. So we're going to have 13 and we have a certain amount per hour. So it's going to be 13 plus the $4 and however many hours we ride it. From there, we know that we spent $25 total. So with whatever amount we spent up front plus the amount that we spent per hour, okay? Now, this should look kind of familiar to you. It should look like one of the problems we were doing earlier. Now, I give you permission to not justify this particular step. As I said, that's the level 4 skill for this particular unit. If you don't feel confident about it, go ahead. I'm not going to mark it wrong, but I think it's a little bit more work than we need to do, especially with the word problem. So let's go ahead and we subtract 13 from both sides. I like to work from the thing that's furthest away from the variable, and that'll give us 4h is equal to 25 minus 13, which is 12. We divide by 4, giving us h is equal to 3. I don't know if I mentioned it earlier. I picked h because it stands for hours. Could I have picked a different variable? Absolutely. Make sure that you always have your unit written as well. I will mark it wrong if you don't have a unit. As always, feel free to ask any questions if you have any.